Hello and welcome to Fair Enough, a podcast series by Art Cologne in collaboration with Texte zur Kunst. Fair Enough brings together artists, curators, writers, and thinkers to reflect on how art and its institutions are responding to the urgencies of our present moment. This season, to mark the 35th anniversary of Texte zur Kunst, we're taking up the journal's motto for the year, which is "There is no art without criticism." With that in mind, we've put together a panel on the topic of the bad review, bringing together Maurin Dietrich, Tim Griffin, Aleksandra Mir, and John Miller to discuss what's at stake for art criticism today. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists. First, we have Maurin Dietrich, who is the director of the Kunstverein Munich, one of Germany's oldest art associations. Next, we have Tim Griffin, a writer, curator, and former editor. He served as the director-in-chief curator of The Kitchen and additionally was the editor-in-chief of Art Forum from 2003 to 2010. Aleksandra Mir is a contemporary artist known for her large-scale collaborative projects and anthropological methods, which involve archival research, oral history, and fieldwork. And we also have John Miller, an artist and writer based in New York and Berlin. He is a professor of professional practice in Barnard College Art History Department. My name is Micaela Dixon, and I will be co-moderating the panel alongside Anna Sinofzik, who is a senior editor here at Texte zur Kunst.
Hi. Thanks for joining us. And it would have been so nice to meet you all in person, but that's not possible, so we make the best of it. I would like to start us off with, maybe it's worth mentioning the fact that we stole the title for this conversation from a book that you, Alexandra, and Tim did together. The topic is the bad review, and or Texte zur Kunst, not only me, but also the teams before us, the editorial teams before, have been working on that subject for a long time. So it's really something that, because it's always, or one of the key concerns of Texte zur Kunst has from the beginning been the shifting role of art criticism, as you all know. So there's one issue that previous editorial team did that was called the Verriss. That's basically the German term for the bad review. Maybe not all of you know. So Verriss means verreißen, which means to put some or tear something to pieces. So this issue came out in 2002, and the proposition was that like really negative value judgments were becoming or were in decline. So there were less and less bad reviews, and reviews tended to become more complacent, more affirmative. And the editors of this issue said it really started in the 90s when networking became more important in the art world. And I think, Tim, in the book that you and Alexandra did together, you mentioned something along these lines as well in your text that you contributed. So this was back then. And then 2 years ago, we did another issue on reviews, which was this one. It's only titled Reviews, and the focus was a bit different there because we wanted to celebrate the review as a form of art criticism or as a form of art writing, because we thought it's not really only the bad review that's in decline, but the review itself. So in the feuilletons and newspapers, there's less and less reviews, more features, more portraits. Like also the borders between these different forms are becoming ever more blurred. So as the cover shows, with the disco balls on it, we really wanted to celebrate the review as a form and invited several writers to contribute reviews. So the whole issue, or almost the whole issue, is just reviews. And I think, John, you contributed one too, right?
I did, yes.
Just comes to me.
Which yeah, it was a review of Bridget Riley's show.
At Hetzer, here,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we also invited or encouraged all the contributors to this issue to also reflect on their own role as a reviewer. Like, why am I reviewing a certain show in this and that way? What might be like, what's my background, and what am I really independent as a critic and stuff like that? And how did I come to my argument? Some people did that, some others don't. Or didn't do that. So it's a mix But in the end, it was really about having more reviews in this issue than usual, because normally we have like 6 to 8 in each issue, and here there's a lot more. And there's also a roundtable discussion in this issue, and this was actually how I came across your book, Aleksandra and Tim. And Aleksandra, you've been kind enough to send me one copy of it, and then I found out that there's also a review by John, a review of John's show in it. And I think we even showed that one as an image, or Marilyn Minter's as well, in that roundtable discussion. And I thought maybe to start us off, I would invite you to comment on the propositions from our issues. I mean, do you disagree, agree with it? What's your perspective? And also how this whole project came about. Maybe you want to tell us a bit about that, Aleksandra and Tim.
You want to start, Tim?
No, you go for it, Alexander.
Should I start? We don't want to be responsible for this. Well, this book took 7 years to put together, so I would keep you here all night if I should tell you everything. But roughly speaking, there are 150 artists who agreed to contribute. It started with an open call. So we just spammed the whole art world as we knew it, and then that spam spread, and organically people learned about it. And a lot of people rejected the proposition from the get-go. They thought it was a terrible idea. They didn't want to be associated with it. They thought it was painful or just boring or just pointless. And the ones who decided that it was cool to be in it, they are in it. So that's the premise of the book. And all the reviews were submitted by the artists themselves. That was the only editorial criteria that we had. Everything else that came in was published as the artists themselves decided it represented them or their idea of what a bad review is.
And I think for me, I mean, Alexander, we had a friendship for a long time. One of my first pieces with Art Forum, I think, was about your work. So that had carried a certain resonance for me. But you came to me asking if we'd like to collaborate. And I had recently pivoted off of Art Forum to another kind of institution, which I think even the parameters of which had a lot to do with a feeling that there were significant changes in the field that asked for a smaller sort of footprint. But in terms of the appeal of the book, beyond its implicit sense of humor, I think there was a sense that, yes, legacy media was changing in terms of its force and dynamics. Definitely there was a recognition that was a little historic even at that point, that there was less of an interest among writers in engaging the negative review, as such, for all the reasons that were outlined by Texte zur Kunst at that juncture, in terms of, if one wants to enhance the power and reach of one's network, one should not risk cutting off one's opportunities. What I might sort of say by a counterpoint, because obviously, we live in an ever-shifting river, is that, I think actually we might see more negative reviews now, but the question is whether or not they have the effect that they once did, insofar as there can be a desire to interject within a sort of discursive field that would have been attributable one way in an earlier period around criticism. And now there can be, if not a performative aspect, a kind of algorithmic aspect, where the writer is actually fulfilling what you expect of that writer, whether that's through the brand that they've cultivated for themselves, or if there are certain positions that a community expect to be articulated, which then are, as opposed to being problematized. So I think that the life of the book has taken different it itself would be a kind of document. But what was thrilling, I know, was to be able to, from a different position, for me, contact any number of artists who had ferreted away their negative reviews, either psychologically or in the archives, and being able to tease that out, and to just be part of that sort of family of experience was a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, one of my favorite and quite early on in your book is the review of an artist, and I can't remember the name of the critic, but he calls the sculptures or the assemblages of a certain artist unforgivable, which is quite strong. I mean, to not forgive someone also for their artwork is distinct.
But we're still laughing.
We're
And
still laughing.
it's a good bad review, you know.
Great. Yeah.
Well, there are different valences of good. There's we can laugh at it good, but then there's the question of like, what's a good generative, shall we say, negative review? But the unforgivable, it's a delicious, who doesn't like camp every once in a while?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, right before Anna and I have been speaking also about like the difference between a good bad review and a bad review, speaking a lot about like editorial like requirements. Also, a requirement of a review to make an argument in particular. I think that's also what the book does in a quite an interesting way. I mean, you don't necessarily have to make an argument in the book to make a really mean proposition about somebody's work under whatever terms you feel in that certain moment. It also speaks, I think, to the question in general about like, do you have to make an argument to write a text about art? I mean, it's kind of it's an open statement.
Yeah, and I mean, at first sight, you know, the bad review, the book, you know, it's very blunt. It's like everybody knows what a bad review is. It's like it's bad. But then once you start looking into it, it's actually like, is it the artist that's bad, or is it the critic, the writing that is bad? And then that's when you have the complexity of good, 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 bad, bad, good, good, bad, bad, which in my opinion is great, you know. So there's a play, there's all this going on, you know, and 150 people contributed what they thought, you know, a bad review is, and we have a spectrum of contributions that answer that question. So yeah, of course, you know, criticisms can be bad for as many reasons that an artwork can be bad, and you have the layering of skill and talent and intention, and you know, and that's what's so beautiful about it, how rich it got. When you just ask a very simple question and you pose it as a survey as opposed to an opinion or a thesis, it's like, what do you think this means? You get the most incredible range of responses.
And I think in the forward or somewhere in your text in the book, Aleksandra, you said that you never asked the artists who submitted the reviews for the reasons why they chose this particular one, or the motivations behind it. And I thought maybe it's worth, because now we have John here who contributed one. I would like to ask you, John, do you still remember what your motivation was? Was it like more for this cathartic effect, or like coming to terms with something, or just for fun?
Well, I submitted a review that when I received it at a pretty young age. I was just 30 years old. It was my first show at Metro Pictures, and Grace Gluck reviewed my show, and ended with the tagline, "Next time, try art, Mr. Miller." And so I was both depressed, but also just wondering, like, how can someone so inept be judging my work? And I was feeling really badly about it. And I went into Metro Pictures one day and I ran into Walter Robinson, and he told me, "I'm really jealous. That's the review I've always wanted to get." You know, he kind of like put the shoe on the other foot. But I think one thing that happened with this collection was many artists did what I did, which was to pick a review where the reviewer is really dorky. And, you know, so it's negative, but also it's like a kind of vindication, like, well, look at what they're writing, you know, can you believe this? So there were many reviews with that tenor. And it's funny because ordinarily I don't follow Roberta Smith's reviews so closely, but she was one of the reviewers who came off writing like a better bad review. She kind of stood out, that it was there was always like a point of interest in what she was writing about, and it wasn't just you know, a kind of like quasi-moralistic dismissal or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that Roberta's work in general takes there's many reviews in the book itself that are Roberta's reviews.
Yeah.
We can think about it. I mean, there's sort of two angles to it. One is as a quite a well-known staff writer, she also had kind of like an opportunity and was well positioned to make these arguments without fearing, let's say, social repercussions, professional repercussions, which in a way
Mhm.
now the situation feels like it's quite different. But it also seems to me somehow important that those people, those jobs are in existence, or maybe were in existence.
Yeah. Well, speaking of repercussions, at one point I was the US contributing editor for ArtScribe International, which was a precursor to Freeze. And I had written I don't remember the artist's name, but I had reviewed someone whose work was based on serial killers, and um, I I panned it. I thought it was kind of exploitative, and shortly after the review appeared, I got a telephone call, and it was just, "Hello, is this John Miller?" And I said, "Yes." And then a very sardonic artist critic, and then just hanging up. And I think it was from that guy. I don't know for sure, but the timing led me to believe that.
I think Tim just raised his hand to say something, or
Tempted to. I should think. How do I follow up a serial killer anecdote? I don't. I don't know precisely what to say. Maybe I should just be quiet. I do think when it comes to just following up on like Roberta Smith in the Times, it's interesting. And I'm not speaking specifically to her, but how something that is a role here is again the power of the platform, which obviously then has a kind of impact on those on the receiving end of the words. But then I think it's interesting from an editorial standpoint, and I'm sure you have had this experience where there are reviews that are complex, but then there are others there are plenty that read like no plays, where if you're deep inside the game, you can actually see what are the forces that are prompting this sentence or this caveat, that framing. Where it's a little bit too nuanced a view, but they're definitely even bad reviews. Yeah, I love complexity, but sometimes there can be a lack of directness in some of the other things that we read.
Yeah, for sure. One question I actually had for you, Maurin, before we kind of continue on the topic more generally, is whether you've ever experienced in your curatorial career a bad review at an institution you worked with, or beforehand.
I think nowadays, for me at least, the worst review is the absence of any review. We have experienced that in my term at the Kunstverein when it came to, I would say, the most complex projects we undertook. One of them was a sort of longer research project with the artist Bea Schlingerhoff that was both intervening in the bylaws of the Kunstverein as well as working with and around the sort of historical material perspective of the building of the Kunstverein, which was the place that staged Degenerate art exhibition. And it's sort of, I think, both the massive amount of research that went into that and the complex political situation in which Bea decided to invite all of the 1,300 members at that time to be a part of that project, made it, at least in the beginning, when we opened the show in the first sort of few weeks, we were really surprised how there was such a lack of engagement with it in terms of we were just longing for someone to actually, like I think a good review in a sense is always also a proof that someone has actually seen the show and tried to understand it to its best of its ability. And it came later, but I think We're right now at a point where, at least in my opinion, criticism hasn't lost sort of its edge, but it's a blade that's very much blunted with so many dependencies, and it hasn't disappeared, but it's sort of been partially, I think, outsourced also to social media, where we can often see that critique is more sort of a place where affirmation is, the default position. And I think it has a lot to do with precarity that makes refusal feel, in a way, too expensive or luxury. And I think that's very sad because I like complexity and I love a good bad review. But there was this T-shirt circulating a couple of years ago that said they don't build statues for critics. Being married to a critic, that it haunted me. But I wish they would build statues for critics.
I can definitely second that. We had a lot of reactions from younger artists who were like, I love this book, but I have nothing to offer you. And that was really heartbreaking. There was really, worse than being told to fuck off from people who thought it was a stupid project was the fact that there were people who wanted to be in it and had nothing to offer. And so, the conclusion was that there are good and bad reviews, but the worst reviews are no reviews. And hopefully this is a celebration of criticism that we wanted to uplift. We saw it disappearing. We saw the physical space in the physical papers vanish. And artists need to be criticized. They need to be acknowledged. And good or bad is kind of besides the point, actually, when it comes to, just like you said, and a proof of somebody having been there. I think that's what most are actually yearning for.
How do you conceive of, or how do you conceptualize nowadays this more recent phenomenon on social media of like the anonymous bad review? So let's say social media pages, there's tons of them in different scenes. There can be one in New York City, LA, Berlin, all over, where it's clearly a member of the community at large who kind of takes to making comments, making a kind of criticism about shows, short form for social media, I would say, but where there is no name, so there's no like addressee. The person is a person. Maybe you discover who it is, but that you don't name yourself. What are the politics of this in your mind?
Can I add something? I find it in this context really interesting that you have these 5 stars here, which is also like the way that people are rating on the internet is already like part of your cover, which I found very interesting because most of them, there's a lot of online reviews, like the newer ones are from online magazines too, I think, but most of them, it starts in the 60s, I think, so most of them are still like traditional print reviews, more or less. But this rating systems and this comes back to what you're saying, Micaela. It's like it normally happens under pseudonym, under I don't know, profiles that you don't really know. There's no accountability. And how important is accountability? That comes back to what you've been saying. And are we losing it to a certain point?
Well, it's funny to think about this in terms of online goods and services in general, because you go to your dentist and then you get home and there's like a leave feedback, and you can pick between 1 and 5 stars, and say more if you want, or how was your flight with United Airlines, and then those are maybe used to evaluate the company's performance or things like that, but also I think as advertising, or it's used for monetization. So there's like an example where these truncated digitalized responses, yes or no, do carry a real impact, maybe not in the way we would like. It's sort of automated, and I guess it's a cybernetic relationship. But I don't think that our criticism can completely divorce itself from this development.
Yeah, Maurin.
I think, in a sense, what you said about anonymity, is that accountability is sort of what distinguishes a critic from a troll. And I think we're living in a time when we sort of live in this tension of visibility without accountability, which would be social media, and accountability without visibility, which is maybe, unfortunately, legacy media or like serious reviews with small readerships, which like Berlin Review and all these like also amazing new magazines that are happening. And in preparation of this talk today, I was picking up the phone to call Stefan Zillig, who's the co-writer of the former anonymous blog titled Donnerstag's blog, which made, I mean, everybody was talking about that in 2014, and they published one of the greatest bad reviews about a show in Friedrichshain called Speculations on Anonymous Materials, and a couple of other brilliant anonymous reviews. And then they had a public performance which was titled The Death of an Art Critic at the Kunsthalle Bern, where they talk about that the idea was really behind Donnerstag's blog to have to insist on the difference between good art and bad art, and it's sort of and the love for that craft, and they say that it's far more dangerous and sort of authoritarian and anti-democratic to sort of deny the public the act of judgment. Essentially, they decided to stop it because, to quote him on that, he said they had the feeling that it made no difference beyond the sort of bubble that was, excited and talking about it. But I think it filled a gap at that time, and I've been looking for a voice so nuanced and also witty and fun, ever since.
Was his persona was it revealed that it was him, or he?
Yeah, he's they when they did the performance, they it was essentially two people. Yeah.
Tim?
I say something just to depart and try to pick up on that a little bit, which I was excited to hear about. This is going to be too brief, but I would be curious to compare tactics and voice when it comes to the anonymous and the signed your review, as it were, at this juncture. And in that regard, I begin to all to say, to what degree are the actual movements and behaviors somewhat similar? And in that regard, and I know I'm saying this while parting, I'm tempted to dial out to your other political questions that aren't necessarily directly involved in the artistic field, as such, where if you look at polemicists on the left and the right who would also perhaps call themselves influencers, there's even been a kind of expression of jealousy, one or the other, regarding their relative success. So even though they have very different positions, the moves that they make in order to build followings, while ostensibly espousing a specific political position, you have a kind of mirroring, that is unfolding. And so one wonders, and this is more of a question than an assertion, to what extent do we see a transition in terms of the posture of the critic, themselves, in terms of not only voicing, what language they use, but how that language then intersects with behavior in real space. Which actually, Maurin, your point, sort of the fact that there were performances around this, also become kind of interesting to me. And it becomes about building kinds of following. And the following is as important as the discursive field itself. Mm. With that, I'm going to depart, and I hope that's not now you can totally trash what I said.
Will do. No kidding.
Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, bye.
Thank you. I think, yeah, Maurin, if you want to pick up on that.
I think sort of picking up on what Tim just said in terms of thinking about performance or performativity, I was thinking about the Crit Club that was recently sort of founded in Berlin, which is sort of both an artwork and a performance by Cem A, which I came across first when he was an intern at Documenta 13 a couple of years ago. He went on to sort of start the Crit Club, which is a sort of club where you come together on a stage and you debate a hypothetical and very unrealistic problem, and a sort of the exaggeration of the problem becomes in a way embodied by, could be two people or four, and then in the middle of each debate there's an actual sport fight. So to the Crit Club I went, it was a boxing match, so people are like actually seriously boxing, and then 30 minutes of debating. And a sort of Cem said that in this sort of moment where the climate where disagreement sort of increasingly feels risky, the Crit Club sort of creates a space for critical play, and I think that's could be maybe an interesting model moving forward. Yeah.
We actually collaborated with them. We had like for our sports issue, I'm not sure if you've seen that. For yeah, that was American football in that case, like the sport. But yeah, I think this performative aspect is really interesting. And also when it comes, I mean, like the whole anonymity thing is also that has a tradition in art writing as well, right? If we think about like, or the person creating a persona that performs the critique. For example, Lynn Tillman and Madame Realism, or like there's heaps of examples. And I think we talked about like these different approaches to criticism and to reviews in particular, where it becomes a bit more subjective in a sense that it feels to be inspired also by auto theory and like forms of writing that are popular or have been popular for a while. And yeah, I would like to ask you what you think of these different approaches and how I mean, what does a review have to deliver in terms of also objectivity, and how playful can it be, and should it be maybe?
Well, I started out with my personal criteria for what I thought I knew a review was. And, having included 150 opinions on a matter, obviously I had to expand my understanding. And, one of my criteria, I would second you again, saying that, a troll and a critic are separate things, just like criticism and hate are separate things. I would very much like to keep that distinction. And sort of mainly to encourage people to appreciate the review, the negative review. Otherwise, if it just blurs into hate, then obviously it's not desirable. But having said that, in the book we accepted anything that the artist decided was bad review for them, and we have a death threat in there, an anonymous Twitter death threat. So I had to expand my notion of what a review can be today, and accept that for a generation this might be it. That might be the only feedback they get, and that's the tragedy of the situation. So I would really like to encourage the writing on whatever opinion, the substantial writing with a signature for me would be the way to go. And in parallel, sturdy artists, personalities that are not children, emotional babies that need to be coddled, but that can handle criticism, and like substantial good criticism, and appreciate it as a part of the dialogue that they're in, by putting the work into public space. I was teaching a class at the Royal the RCA here in London at the same time I was editing the book, and wanted to infuse my students with this idea and see what they could make out of it. They haven't even started showing. They're very young. They're extremely fragile, and they're very, very, very sort of beyond fragile of what I think my generation was when we started. But at the end of the semester, I had them write bad reviews of each other. So everybody had to basically write a bad review of somebody else. And it was hilarious, and they were laughing, and I could see their confidence growing in the process of being able to engage with criticism, properly, and sort of formulate one argument. Why do you don't, what's wrong with this? The color is wrong. Fine, great. You've formulated an argument. Sign your name, thanks. But with online hate, I don't really know where to put it, but it's still in the book. So there you go.
John, Maurin, something you want to add? Or
Well, I guess I was just thinking about there's been a kind of dialogue about the waning influence of art critics going on since at least the 1980s. I remember one time taking part in an October panel where at that point people were worried that the collectors were taking over and that the critics had no effect on the market. And I don't know if that's whether critics occupy an important position in the market or not is so important. And partly the way I think about the question too is from my side of it when I'm writing criticism, where I don't know everything ahead of time before I start writing. So the process of writing a review opens a workup to me, and I remember more about something if I've written about it. I see things differently if I've written about it. So it's a transformative process, and I think that that's important, even if it's only the critic we're talking about. But usually there's some people who read it, and I don't know if in terms of like what's going on with the market. I mean, right now the market seems to be very depressed for whatever reason, that there's not much art being bought and sold. So how do we square this question of influence from critics with fairly subdued market? Those are some thoughts I have on all that.
Indeed, I think it's interesting what you say. It's true. I think like writing is such an important process because it's a way of like thinking through something that you haven't completely arrived at yet. So you're all in the process of, I mean, I think very few people, unless it's very a specific thing, know how they're going to end or conclude a review, an essay, a thought when they begin. One of the things, even like in the lead up to this panel that I was thinking a lot about is kind of the state of criticism, I guess, or when you have like these press texts for galleries that kind of get regurgitated in some form into this format of the review, right? So it's like those things are coextensive to one another, almost like you need one for the other, but they're both like beneficial to the gallery from a market perspective because you can produce material then to show your collectors that also kind of can influence maybe someone's desire to buy work, etc. And then even ahead of this conversation, we were talking about magazines like Ursula, for example, that's done by Hauser and Wirth, or like Gagosian Quarterly. These very obviously positive. I mean, it would be surprising if not, but these kind of like these forms of PR, let's call them, that are extensions, engines of these galleries that are quite fashionable too, that are also, they pay artists and writers quite well to be featured in their magazine. So it would be quite challenging if you were in a situation of financial precarity, to say no, and also what the conditions attached to your authorship there. So the conditions attached to writing for these kind of magazines put the idea of criticism into a funny place. You think, okay, Do they want to know the full story of maybe some of the real thinking behind if something is working or not? Or is there a space for that? Or is that the space for that? That's abstract, but
I would imagine none of those publications feature bad reviews.
I would imagine not.
Yeah.
I would like to come back to something that you said, John, with the process of writing, which really helps you to really find out what you think about a certain show. And I think the process of editing plays a major part in that too. I mean, in our experience as editors of reviews, we are also often in this position where you develop an argument together because there is none when the text arrives and you get the sense of, okay, I'm not exactly sure what this person is trying to communicate, but let's find out. And then this process starts together as a dialogue. And I think that's important. The dialogue aspect is super important, not only in writing the review, but also when it comes to the reception of reviews. And that was something that you mentioned, Aleksandra, this dialogue, like between the students, for example. But then also, and I think that's a major difference, like when we look at the online sphere and the legacy media, that normally things happen in a certain context and there should be a dialogue. So the review is a starting point and then it feeds into something else and it also builds on something. And that's maybe not there as much, or hopefully it will be at some point, but on the internet it's different, no? I mean, I would say it's often, or in social media, for example, where you have these ratings, thumbs up, thumbs down, there's no sense of community really, even though it's called social media, and you don't have this reverberance, which really means a lot when you're writing reviews, or at least to me.
I would also like to challenge the idea that criticism comes after the art. Because, it's easy to sit here, at my age, at this expert panel and be like so well informed. We all have been through so much and we've seen so much and we have our language. But, when I started, I walked into the School of Visual Arts. I got off a plane, arrived to New York City, walked into the School of Visual Arts in 1989. I didn't know what contemporary art was. I had been interested in graphic art and I was thinking of becoming a graphic designer. I had seen the Impressionists in Paris and I walked into this world that would become my world, but I didn't know at that point that I would become an artist, or I didn't have a language or even the information to think about art. And the first thing that met me in the lobby of the school was a stand of Village Voice, free Village Voices to the students. Every single week, I could pick up this newspaper and there would be a full page of criticism. There would be film criticism and there would be art criticism and lots of other stuff that I could read freely. And Amy Taubin was writing about avant-garde cinema, and she was also my teacher in the same school. And Jay Hoberman was writing about film. Peter Shadol, an incredibly beautiful critic, was writing about art. And so as a young student, I learned to talk about art by these people, by the critics. And the critics educated me into how to think. And, slowly you would go into exhibitions and go to openings and you start to have conversations with your peer and you would use literally you would start to sample them, in your opinion making, and you grow like that. And I'm very, very grateful that I had them as my sort of mentors, instructors in a way, to say this is an area that we behave like this and we talk like this and we can disagree, but these are the words and concepts that we use. I don't know what a student today, starting off on social media, how they would formulate a process like that today. It's lost on me. I'm too old for that, but I'm really, really grateful that I had it. And so I think criticism is extremely important because it's a conversation about the thing that we can't really talk about, and somebody's made effort to tell us how we can use language, and that can be multiplied and conveyed. And so I would I feel that critics are our endangered species today, the ones that make the effort and have the space.
Coming back also to what you were mentioning, do you think it's true that reviews of all kinds are even though they respond to, let's say, an exhibition, a text, whatever, that they are fundamentally like in of themselves monologues? So they respond to something, but then there ends within themselves. Or do you see them, or can they be a way where a review, let's say, is sort of like lobbed back to the reviewer. Do you know what I mean? Where somebody gets to respond to something that is said. Let's say it's negative. Let's say it's more likely negative than positive because people very rarely respond to compliments in a long form way. But I was thinking kind of about recently about different publications, also these like letters, the letters to the editor section, which can be quite interesting in magazines. They provide this opportunity for people, but also writers themselves to respond to what's been written about something, to also correct a record if they feel like it's wrong. I mean, the readership of those things maybe is, high or low. I couldn't say, but I thought that format, like that way of kind of like eventually being able to kind of like serve the ball back also is kind of special somehow, that like it keeps something in motion. It's not about ending something, it's about continuing a conversation. So then with the bad review, or even this kind of like, these mic drops, even these, recent reviews of certain things which are negative, feel like they're ending somehow to me. I don't know how you see it.
Well, this is kind of a historical example, but I don't know if anyone's familiar with the book Challenging Art by Amy Newman, and it's a oral history of art forum. But she talks about how art forum was a kind of bastion of Greenbergian aesthetics, and how Robert Smithson basically took over the magazine and changed its orientation to, a more postmodern outlook. And that principally happened when Smithson responded through, he published a series of essays, but he also specifically responded to Michael Fried's Art and Objecthood, where he just trashed Fried and eventually won out, but it was really like a battle of wills. And I don't know if something would unfold like that now, because it was maybe like what allowed something like that to happen was like the simplicity of Greenberg's argument allowed it to function as an armature for debate or something.
Yeah, also I think this idea sometimes in modernism that, you have to fundamentally prove everybody else but yourself right. Like the project is that you are correct, and logic and reason will be the bastions that kind of like bring you there fundamentally. So then everybody else will agree with you because, of course, your project is correct.
Sorry, I've got to move. I got a low battery warning.
I mean, I always saw the review as a starting point for a conversation because, it's published. So a lot of people can read it and then take that review into the public space and discuss it with each other, So it was like a rings on the water. An impactful review would have, an impact and in the community, and people would take the conversation wherever they wanted to take it. But that's how I always saw the review, as the beginning of something that can be expanded upon and disagreed upon, whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it starts conversations.
I agree.
Well, I would like to respond to that because I think in an ideal world it does, but whenever I have taught in the last years, I've been sort of uncannily reminded of the conflict is not abuse slogan by Sarah Schulman, and I look at, or the debates I'm having with the students is very much informed by the idea that any sort of conflict at this point is abuse, and that there's very little space and capacity to hold moments of complexity, ambiguity, and nuanced opinions. When you told the example about having your students write bad reviews, I'm like, that's such a good idea. And I'm yeah, kudos to you that you were able to sort of both initiate and then hold the space for that to happen, and everything it sort of brings up. But I think in the times that we're living in, we're both sort of primed for conflict, and we're not sort of ready to to hold the space to actually have these conversations offline in a space. We're definitely Stefan Tillich said this when we were talking over the phone. He was like, we scream more, we don't debate more. And that sort of stayed with me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, yeah, Aleksandra, the way that you work with your students with the bad reviews, I really, I love it. And I would be curious if this could, like many people should pick up on that because it's really such an important skill. Also in the editorial process, I think for authors who are writing these reviews, like even there you get to, or I have the sense that it gets difficult to criticize or to ask people to really develop their argument because even they feel offended oftentimes. It's really hard to like the editorial process should be something that, and most people appreciate it, but it's getting like so rare that people really make the effort in magazine, or there's not the capacity to do it. That you take like all these rounds and really dig into it and see what is it really tenable what you're saying, and then like this process or to really appreciate that instead of being like, okay, no, I want to get this off my table and that's it. I think this is also something that is super important when it comes to reviewing, like questioning your own argument in the process and have it being questioned by others and to work with it in a productive way.
We had an interesting phenomena in the editorial process of the book because, you know, a lot of people sent us many reviews. They were like, okay, here's my whole folder, choose what you want, or here's one, I have more. Or we would go out and research once they said, yes, I want to be in this book. So we would come back and dig things out. And I think we have 10 contributions from artists that were criticized by Roberta Smith negatively. And they all wanted hers. And we were like, okay, this is like creating a weird imbalance in the book because there's so much of Roberta Smith. It's like, but no, I mean, we try to do, you have another one? Can you? No, I want hers. Because they really trusted her in her opinion, in her negative opinion of them. And there was probably a bit of prestige in that as well. And the quality of it, you know, everything was great. So I think you have to decide, are you going to work on elevating the standard of criticism and of artists being handled criticism and create these sturdy personalities that can handle debate? Or are you going to go down, you know, and meet people at the lowest denominator where everybody's just like careful and offended and, you know, I don't want to go down that route because it's boring. So, you know, for my 5 cents worth that I can do, if I have a semester with students and I can prime them to trust me and they know each other and they know they're going to see each other in the schoolyard next day, at the very least, we can go through a process together of growing. And at the end, they can sort of have a laugh and go for a drink and be like, yeah, we can still be friends, you know, even if you don't like my sculpture. It's not the end of the world, you know, it's a conversation. And so, you know, that's for everyone to decide what side, you know, where do you want to take it?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too to me because we you know, we use the word like reviews, bad reviews, but we also kind of somehow, as you were saying, speak about how we speak to one another in community about what each other is doing and the fragilities around that, the fragilities around community, around our like sense of belonging in a community, participating in a community. But it's this kind of interesting but necessary ecosystem that also, especially when it's done right, let's say, whatever that looks like, but when it's done, I think with a degree of, I would call it like integrity. So it's interesting to me that, you know, these artists see Roberta Smith as a figure of integrity because she was sort of given, or she was, her platform for many years as a staff writer was one of integrity. I'm sure in a way, yeah, to have even your work looked at by such a figure was something to begin with, because it said that it was being dealt with in a way that was serious, that was, you know, that wasn't compromising, shall we say, and that also wasn't compromised somehow by social structures, by, you know, these kind of like infrastructures of, I liked actually the way, I can't remember in the roundtable who said it, but actually it's on the roundtable. It's in the piece after the roundtable, but it's talking about the art world as like a contact space, like, which is just to say like social. We're all, you know, it's a very specific kind of infrastructure, and it also sort of leads me to this one kind of more, let's call it like 19th century, but like this one development in the review that has been kind of quite salacious, also like a bit seducing somehow, is also how gossip has made a way into this format. So like this way in which, like, you know, I don't know how it is for you, but when I read something that's like it's a bit 19th century social reportage, shall we say, like you kind of get this sense that you're reading something that's a bit scathing, that like hairs on your neck stand up. You read it so fast because you're able to process information, because there's a kind of like entertainment that's going on in the review too, which maybe isn't the point, but it's an interesting kind of new, I would almost say new-ish development of some bad reviews nowadays. Like you're kind of waiting to watch somebody say something that might be kind of mean, and you're also participating somehow in that economy, for whatever reason, good, bad, beyond the company.
But do you think it's new? I'm not sure. I
Maybe
think
it's not new.
I mean,
Maybe it's not
especially
new.
like the early ones in your
Yeah.
book, Aleksandra, I think there's nasty stuff and there's a bit, gossip is going on there, and it's really entertaining. And I think it's I don't really think it changed so much over time. I'm not sure. It's just, this is my impression, Maurin.
Well, I think my at least favorite sort of gossipy art critique texts are actually historical ones. When I think about like Vasari's anecdotes, or even like Peggy Guggenheim's Confession of an Art Addict, sort of realizing that it's always been there. It's just very rarely archived, because most of it is, by the very nature of it, is ephemeral. No, it circulates quickly and then also sort of fades just as fast, and it doesn't create a sort of, or it rarely creates a sort of sustained discourse or a canon, and I think that's what makes the book even more important, because because of that nature. No. And I also think, in a way, sort of contradict what I just said, is that gossip, at least in my experience of it, is that it obviously also creates a sort of counter archive, which has been, when we've been working towards the 200 years anniversary of the Kunstverein München in 2023, it's been the most valuable source of information, is going back and talking with people about everything that they never wrote down, or were maybe too afraid to ask, not included, edited, or everything that's literally happening in the footnotes. The alliances, the hostilities, and the economies of institution making in history. Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to the archive aspect, I think somebody mentioned the Village Voice, for example. I think reviews in themselves are also like, there's like marginalized practices that have been talked about or discussed in reviews and nowhere else, because there were no catalogs, no expensive publications for them. But then there's like certain publications who did review these shows. And so also from an archival perspective, it's really important to have these old reviews now, because nobody else really cared to deal with certain shows at the time, right?
Also, I think there's
a great example, I think.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that Village Voice is a great example, especially when it comes to queer culture and lots of artists.
Yeah, no, I agree, and also like with the Kunstverein Munich and the Village Voice, those are both sort of localized scenarios, you know, and a particular discourse can happen on that very immediate level. And one thing I think about is I haven't written so many negative reviews lately, and I think one reason is the inevitable globalization of the art world, and how do you, you know, there's not like the same local focus, you know, that's being kind of just, I don't know if dispersed is the right word, but it's networked into, you know, a much larger system than it ever has been before. And, you know, there's no going back. That's the way things are going to be going forward, you know. And how do you deal with that critically, you know? And I feel like I'm often confronted with that phenomenon, especially with big shows like Documenta or the Berlin Biennial, where some of or with many of the artists, I don't have much of a cultural context for their work. Many of the artists are victims of colonialism, and then I feel not so qualified to evaluate that. And then also on top of that, many of these artists, it may be the only time I ever see their work, and then they'll disappear. And so how do you orient yourself to that? The other thing that I think has changed is earlier on, I would judge everything against the standard of conceptual art. But then with conceptualism, as time goes on, it becomes more and more kind of academic category. And I often think of Dan Graham in that respect, because after a certain point, he refused the description conceptualist. And at first I thought he was joking. He just said, all my work has always been about comedy. But he was really like trying to keep the conceptualist kind of academicism away. And looking back at his work, then it wasn't just like an idle claim. A piece like Performer Audience Mirror, it's a very dry form of stand-up or something. But anyway, those are like factors that I'm dealing with. Like, I don't feel now that I want to apply the standards of conceptual art to everything I might review. I don't think it makes sense the way that it once did, when it was more of a kind of emergent practice.
Maybe that's in a way sort of when you, John, spoke about the sort of limits in knowledge, or limits in knowledge around the background of the artists. I was thinking about the recently published review of the Berlin Biennial by Pablo Larios, that's both witty, sharp, incredible, informed, as well as pointing out the limits in his own knowledge, while doing something that I felt deeply appreciative of, which is organizing knowledge, structuring a discourse, and also clarifying certain political shifts. And he sort of very critically examines the overwhelming density of trauma representation as part of that biennial, while at the same time sort of rejecting the sort of Dean Kissick argument of conservatism, this conservative backlash, I would say. And I'm so thankful when people still take on the task of trying to think through a show like that while making us aware of the limits of what they maybe do not feel capable talking about, but still sort of still taking it on.
Yeah, I think in the roundtable conversation of Texte zur Kunst for reviews, this was a major question. It seemed like this idea of who gets to speak about what art, basically, who gets to review, who is able to, what are the politics of this kind of presumption that came about at some point not so long ago, several years ago, but that certain kinds of experience have to be depicted, have to be reviewed, have to be thought through by individuals who have similar experiences. Then this kind of the politics that arises with this kind of way of thinking about art in also environments like the Berlin Biennial, which then is already kind of not an isolated, but like a separate context from where perhaps the beginnings of those practices, ideas, etc., come from.
Yeah, I think Aleksandra?
I wanted to say we have translations from 14 languages in our book. That's why it took 7 years to make it. But I was very, very seriously, because I have a transnational kind of life. I didn't want it just to be New York, because there's a lot of resources in New York, and everybody comes to New York, and everything happens in New York still, I think. And it was very important to me to try to reach other places. Now, even there's a huge limitation in my network, of course. But yes, we have 14 languages. I'm very proud of that. And so, in a way, reflective of 14 different art scenes, local art scenes. There's a great segment on Icelandic art where the critic is like trashing the scene more than an artist. It's like, why does everything has to be so fucking cute in Iceland? That's his problem. It's not serious enough for him. And this is where the anthropologist in me wakes up, because I'm really interested in hearing the kind of in between the line arguments that people are making, not necessarily about an artist or a piece of art, but about their reality, the bigger reality, that they're in, whether that's capitalism or if it's this like Icelandic geography, that makes everybody like relatives, and you kind of have to be nice, so nobody can be critical because that's their neighbor. I don't know what the reason was for that, but I'm just speculating. And I think when you start comparing, these different cultural contexts, then you see your own. That's the point, really, that you start to see your own biases and the world you're in. And so yeah, I'm all for the local, especially somebody else's local. That's really interesting to me.
And I think such considerations are maybe like an upside, or the positive effect of, if we say we have less bad reviews or less harsh value judgments or negative value judgments, maybe that's the good side of it, that we are maybe a bit more considerate when it comes to different social contexts, to local contexts, and we are a bit more careful to come up with the absolute judgment, which, yeah, if we want to see it that way. So maybe it's the flip side of this over carefulness that is happening a lot, because of if I can say that too, the fear of being cancelled out online, which also plays a big role, I think. But it's still important to be able to discuss these things, and with care, though.
Mhm.
In the preparation for today, I reread this text by Eddie Frankel, Have Pain, Trauma, and Politics Silenced Art Criticism, which I think he also mentions the bad review. And he writes, and I'm just going to quickly quote him on that. Quote, "This creates what I call the tyranny of context. We've ushered in a kind of figurative moralism where to agree with an artwork's politics and empathize with the artist's circumstance is to be good, while to question or even merely overlook this personal context is to be bad. It's not a meaningful way of engaging with art. It's self-centered, self-aggrandizing, self-defensive way of using art to tell the world you're not a bad person." And I thought that was a kind of interesting description of the state of critique today.
Yeah, it kind of interfaces with this question, or this kind of word that several of you have mentioned, but like nuance and complexity. This real question of this fabric of complexity that's, yeah, neither good or bad, but has a shape that also requires specific kind of tools, I think, to navigate in ways that are kind and caring, but still critical, still curious, I think.
Yeah, bring back. Oh no, sorry, John.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, like, I mean, up until like I think the late 90s, the art form had like a best and the worst section, and then they cut out the worst section, and I think that's it's a shame. I'm all here for the worsts of them all and the bests of everything.
Yeah, but it's also super symptomatic, like, for everything that we said. No.
Yeah, I just wanted to, picking up on the idea of nuance, thinking about models for criticism, and one model that I like is something proposed by Pierre Macheret, who wrote Theory of Literary Production, and he talked about the intentionalist fallacy, which is reducing the meaning of an artwork to the artist's intentions, versus the prescriptive fallacy, reducing the artwork to the critic's intentions. And I think that throws it out to kind of like a larger, more discursive model, like John Dewey's distinction between the art object and the artwork, where the artwork includes the collective process of reception. So I think the challenge is to write from that standpoint, that realizing that it's not just you, the critic, or you, the artist, but also people more broadly who look at the artwork.
In other words, don't take it personally.
Yeah.
It's not about you, even if it's your name on it. It's not about you. You know, I think that's a good lesson.
It makes me think of this Taylor Swift song. Say it's not about me, but what if it is?
There you go. 2025 motto, I think.
But that is a very interesting distinction, because to be honest, the people are in our book and the people are not in our book. They fall either in one or the other camps. There are people who can handle it not being about them, and then there are people who are so hurt, offended, upset that they can never separate themselves from the written word about them. So yeah, I think I appreciate that. You're not a bad person. Great quote.
Yeah.
You're a bad artist, but not a bad person.
Next time, try art, John. Maybe this is also a nice way to end this, or is there anything else you would like to add? Because we're over an hour.
I've said my piece.
I guess maybe my final question would be, do you have advice for bad review writers and bad review receivers, finally, to people on both ends of the river? What is your
I have to move again, sorry. I don't think I have particular advice, but just to be engaged and to
maybe for the receivers, it's been mentioned, don't take it personally.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah.
And cope with the complexity, maybe also.
Yeah, or maybe to think about it as a dialogue, like don't think like that the publication of a review marks an end of discussion or something.
I can speak for the senior contributors in our book. We have artists that have been working for many decades, and they wear their worst reviews like war medals, badges of honor. Look what I survived. Look how hard it was for us, and we did it still. I mean, any artist that stops making art because of criticism probably wasn't very convinced about the work in the first place. So, you know, an art career is not a Broadway show.
Well said. Well said.
And also, especially in our attention economy now, it's so valuable to have somebody actually review your show, as Maurin said in the beginning. It's really the worst thing that can happen is that nobody cares.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Oscar Wilde said, measure criticism by the inch, right? So
By the inch.
yeah.
Nice. Super. Well, thank you so much for this really thoughtful, fun, interesting, comedic discussion. Really appreciate it. And in your time as well.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for inviting us.
Micaela. Thank you, Anna, for hosting, bringing us together.